Hello, everyone. This is Kirsten Sickley, who will begin our program tonight.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kirsten Sickley, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Central Carolinas. Welcome to our conversation tonight on traffic stop disparities. We're excited to have this conversation with Harold Medlock, former Deputy Chief of Police here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and former Chief of Police in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Chief Medlock served as Chief of Police in Fayetteville for nearly 4 years, retiring in January 2017. He served for over 2 decades with our Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, last as Deputy Chief in 2008. He served as National Special Security Event Co-Chair for the 2012 Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. Chief Medlock actively served on a number of law enforcement and social issue boards, including the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission and the North Carolina Commission for Racial and Ethnic Disparity. He presented written and verbal testimony for the President's Task Force for 21st Century Policing. Chief Medlock currently serves as the Associate Monitor for Accountability and Transparency for the Charlotte Police Department Consent Decree. He serves as a subject matter expert and strategic site liaison for several Bureau of Justice Assistance projects, including Strategic Policing Initiative, Public Safety Partnership, Project Safe Neighborhood, and body-worn cameras. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight, Harold, and we're happy to have all of our guests joining us live on YouTube. We're going to explore the topic for about 40 minutes, and I will encourage you attendees to put questions into the chat box. We're going to save about 15 minutes at the end to answer questions from our audience. We'll also tomorrow send you a survey and a racial profiling checklist that I'll tell you more about later. But I did want to make an important note. At YWCA, our programs are always including racially diverse presenters. Tonight, that's not the case. Both Harold and I identify as white. We are committed to the work of eliminating racism, and we hope that this conversation is one way that we can explore together how we can all be allies in this work. So let's get started. Harold, our guests might not be familiar with the analysis of nearly 16 million traffic stops in North Carolina from 2002 to 2013, led by UNC political science professor, Dr. Frank Baumgartner. That study found that Black drivers were 200% more likely than white drivers to be searched, and 190% more likely to be arrested after having been pulled over for seatbelt violations. This research was coming to light right at the time that you were taking the reins of the police force in Fayetteville, where it's important to note at the time there was deep mistrust of the police. Both the city manager and the former police chief had stepped down under pressure. Wow, what timing. How did this data inform your approach to joining the Fayetteville community?
Well, Kirsten, thanks, and it's great to be with you tonight. It was again that information that I had the advantage of looking at that data, those data that had been compiled and certainly been analyzed by Professor Baumgartner was one of many things that I had looked at and had studied as I went through the process of becoming or competing for the chief's job there, and then meeting with the city manager and preparing to move from Charlotte to Fayetteville. So it framed and helped me start to think about the changes that needed to be effected almost immediately. There were several studies and certainly some reports that were out on some of the things that had happened in the past in Fayetteville involving the police department and our community. And so looking at all of that information really helped me frame my first months in Fayetteville. I will tell you that looking at that information as it applied to Fayetteville made me understand and realize that I had no time to waste, that I had to begin to act almost immediately.
Well, I know there was another impetus to action. I remember you're telling me years ago a story about your wife, Gloria, and her Bible study group, new to her in Fayetteville, and a traffic stop that really ignited your thinking about your early days in Fayetteville. Will you tell our audience that story?
Sure. And you put it nicely. You said ignited my interest. It made me mad. So, we were doing a lot of work in 2013 in those first months, and really had started to think about how we were going to change our approach as policing and police officers in Fayetteville. But my wife has been involved and started there in Fayetteville as a member of Bible Study Fellowship. And one of the things that they do, the leaders, every Friday morning at 5 a.m., meet at one of the local churches there, and they have their own time of study and fellowship, and it requires great commitment from those folks. So Gloria was getting up at 4:30, 4:15 every Friday morning, which meant I did, and all the other ladies did too in the community. So I saw Gloria off, and she went one Friday morning, and I sat down, had my coffee, was, as I say, fat, dumb, and happy, preparing for work that day, checking emails. And at 7 o'clock, my dear wife, who has been around policing her whole adult life, came in the door and stood over the chair where I was at and told me this story. And this is the story. As they began the Bible study that morning with some prayer time, these are all ladies of these are all ladies who are ladies. I guess I don't know how to describe the age group, but nevertheless, they were all my wife's age or older. And so as one lady began to talk, she broke down and started crying. And that's, sometimes people are facing problems, but of course the group stopped and said, well, what's wrong? And she said, well, I was leaving home this morning, my home in my community here in Fayetteville, pulled out of my driveway, drove down to the end of my block, made the left. And as soon as I did, a Fayetteville police car stopped me. And the officer walked up and asked her, or told her that she had been stopped because she ran the stop sign. And she explained, officer, I've lived in this neighborhood for several decades, and I'm very careful about this stop sign because we have children here, and I've always been an advocate for making sure that it's safe. And he said, well, you ran it. And then he said in a very abrupt tone, where are you going? And she said, well, I'm going to a Bible study at Village Baptist Church. And he said, again, very abruptly, well, there's no Bible studies going on at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, so I need to know where you're going. And she said, well, I am going. If you'd like to follow me there, you're certainly welcome to. And he goes, well, no, I don't need to follow you there. And he said, but don't you run that stop sign anymore. And he turned around and left, got back in his car and left. And of course, this left this lady shaken. She drove to the Bible study and shared that story with the other ladies, one of those being my wife. And so at 7 o'clock that morning, my wife comes in, shares that story, and points a finger in my face and says, now, what are you going to do about it? And so, those kinds of things we hear about, and we hear that, people are shaken and upset and don't trust the police. But when your own wife hears that and has been around the business for several decades with me, and she has that reaction, it certainly is a call to action, and actually ramped up my sense of urgency for the issues and the problems that we had there in the department and with the community.
And this dear woman in her Bible study group was a senior woman of color, right?
She surely was. Yes, ma'am. She was, Kirsten, older than my wife, and I would never call my wife senior. So she was quite a bit older than my wife, a very gracious. I describe those ladies as elegant because they're they're just good. They're just good ladies. And so, yeah, she was quite a bit older than Gloria.
Well, over the years, law enforcement began to use traffic stops. We've talked about this a lot as a means to search drivers to find contraband, right?
Yeah.
And such searches, we've learned, actually result in relatively few drug busts. Right. And that's well documented. But however, there's still sustained and troubling disparities in how people of color are treated. And I've heard you refer to these searches as, quote, fishing expeditions.
Right.
But that practice in our country is still very widespread. So how hard was it to shift the mindset of the officers in Fayetteville, Harold?
No, it was really, it was difficult. Shortly after this incident with my wife happened, I have to tell you, I'd started a couple of months before that, having quarterly meetings with all of my officers and all of my employees, the dispatchers, the folks that worked in headquarters that weren't police officers, all of those support personnel, even the custodial staff, because I wanted everybody to understand exactly what our mission was and what my intent was. And I wanted to do that in a way, Kirsten, that cut out any filter from my commanders, who some didn't certainly agree, and supervisors. I wanted to go directly to the officers. One of the things that I have to tell you I did, and we'll come back to the meetings, but in that next meeting, after this lady shared this information with my wife, I do need to tell you that morning I went in and I was on a rant. It's never good when the chief is upset, but I called my internal affairs commander in, told him that I wanted to know who that officer was that conducted that traffic stop. I wanted him, and it was a white male. I wanted him in my office before the close of business that day, Friday afternoon. So I said, check the radio traffic, check our computer aided dispatch, which requires officers to call those stops in. I want you to check car camera. I want to know everything that we know about this traffic stop. And Kirsten, about 3 hours later, my internal affairs commander came back to me and said, Chief, there is no record of that traffic stop. The officer did not call it in. He did not turn his car camera on. There is no report of any radio traffic or any dispatch traffic. That guy was out there playing the field. He was fishing, which made me even more angry. So shortly after that, we had our quarterly meeting, and I stood in front of my 400 or so officers, the 200 or so support personnel, and my dispatchers. I told them the story of what had happened. And Kirsten, I told every one of them that I will one day find out who you are. And when I do, it's not going to be good for you. And some said later that I threatened those officers, and they're right, I did. But they needed to know clearly that my intent was to weed out that kind of behavior. So that officer that morning was on a fishing expedition. He was stopping a car at 5 o'clock in the morning in a neighborhood, and really, in my mind, probably had no good reason other than he concocted the "you rolled the stop sign" story. Frankly, in my mind, at 5 o'clock in the morning, if you roll a stop sign in a neighborhood, okay, we've got more important things to do. But again, that is an example of phishing. The other is the officers. We have great technology in the cars now, and thank goodness we do. But those computers can allow some degree of phishing, where the officers are running tags at stop signs, or stoplights, to see who has an expired tag or registration violation, something like that, or a no operator's license. And that's not what those computers are intended to do. So again, I clarified that we wouldn't be doing that anymore. I didn't put any written order out. I made sure that everybody heard that from my mouth to their ear. And I think sometimes that's more effective. So it was a defining moment for the department and for me, that we started to change the way we conducted traffic enforcement, not traffic stops. And there's a difference.
Yeah, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of that for our attendees, because this is a definite policy shift that you communicated. And so talk us through that transformation and the changes you were trying to effect.
So, Kirsten, traffic enforcement and traffic stops are born out of traffic enforcement. Traffic enforcement really started in this country to keep people safe. If you really go back and think about the times that we have been stopped in our life, and believe me, as a young man, I had my fair share of traffic stops, from the good cops in Gaston County, but they were for a variety of things, but mostly they were for the moving violations, the things that hurt or kill people, and those are speeding, traffic stoplight, people running those. People running stop signs, and you've already heard my position on stop signs at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is not good. At DWI and reckless driving, those are the things that either hurt or kill people. So rather than focusing on an expired tag or expired registration or no operator's license through a computer check, let's do the things that are important and keep our community safe. And those are those moving violations that reduce harm and reduce death. And as I worked through that particular meeting with my officers, that I shared the new strategy. There was a lot of angst in the rooms. It was multiple meetings over 2 days, but there was a lot of anger and angst and frustration that I was taking a tool away from them that was going to cause crime in Fayetteville to go up. And we just had to weather that storm. A lot of officers shared their frustration with me and with the direction. But at the end of the meetings and that direction, those officers went out and they did what most adults will do when you tell them not to do what they've been doing. They didn't do anything. And that doesn't apply just to cops. It applies to people in every walk of life and every business. Okay, you tell me to quit doing something, I'm going to quit doing everything. And so our traffic stops in the middle of 2013 and into the early 2014, the traffic enforcement, our stops went almost to nothing. And those officers were essentially revolting against me. And if I told you or the listeners tonight that it didn't scare me, it did, because we had a serious traffic problem in Fayetteville. We have a very, very youthful population in that great city with Fort Bragg and those brave soldiers that are there protecting, defending our country, that like to drive fast, and they've cheated death overseas. They've come back home, they buy a fast car, fast motorcycle, and they think they're invincible. So we had a high traffic, serious injury, traffic fatality problem in our city. And I really, for a couple of reasons. First, to curb that death and serious injury problem in our city, but more importantly, or as importantly, to start treating people fairly. Let's deal with the things that keep people alive. So after about 4 months of really low traffic enforcement stops for moving violations, and all the other violations had stopped as well, I brought about 10 officers and 2 good sergeants into my office one afternoon. We just had a conversation. I said, folks, listen, this is what I'm trying to do. And bless their hearts. And this, I say that in a good way, as we say in the South, bless those officers' hearts and those sergeants. They went out and they started doing the traffic enforcement that saved lives, that reduced injuries. And slowly but surely, Kirsten, it came back as other officers saw that what these officers were doing, more and more bought into it, more and more supervisors, and it became then the way of life for Fayetteville PD. And so our traffic enforcement stops for moving violations came back. The things that I had been told that were going to happen if we stopped the non-moving violation stops, the regulatory, like the license and registration and all of those green violations, I call them, but all of those things went away. The moving violation stops came up. And surprisingly, at the same time, our crime rate went down in 2014, 15, and 16. So traffic stops for regulatory and searches didn't equate to keeping our crime rate down. We simply went away from all of that to moving violations. More importantly, or as importantly, complaints against officers went down. Injuries to both the people on traffic stops and our officers went down. Complaints, all of those things reduced in a great way in 14, 15, and 16. And we just continued that, that trend, and the officers bought in. It became a way of life.
I remember looking at some of the statistics for this with this new approach, that your officers wound up actually doing more traffic stops in 2016, which was your last full year in Fayetteville, than they had been doing in 2012, the year before you arrived. But the reasons for the stops changed.
Right.
Searches declined, but also warnings increased. Can you talk a little bit about the climate? Because we've talked about the difference between embracing a guardian mentality rather than a warrior mentality when it comes to policing. And you got to Fayetteville in 2013, and the head of the local NAACP asked to meet with you because the climate was not good. So that's an extraordinary shift over the course of 4 years. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it really was a partnership, though, with Mr. Jimmy Buxton, with the NAACP and his leadership team. We talked through the strategy. They knew what we were planning to do, and it's really funny because as I met with my officers, the other thing that we did, and we spent an enormous amount of time going to our community groups, our community meetings that were monthly or bi-monthly, and sharing with them the strategy and asking them if this was appropriate, if this was something that they thought was important to Fayetteville. And this wasn't just African American neighborhoods. First, there are none in Fayetteville. There are no real white or black neighborhoods because it's a military town and everybody has just always lived together. So our community groups were very diverse, as our neighborhoods are. And as we shared the strategy with them, and they shared their opinion back to me and in my leadership, we had officers in the room in all of these meetings. They started to hear the hearts of the people in the rooms. Interestingly, we had people in the neighborhoods who would say, "No, wait a minute, Chief, I don't want you to give up on traffic enforcement in my neighborhood because we have a bad stop sign or an intersection." And my response to them was, "Tell us where it is, and we will work with you to not only enforce the traffic violation, but we'll figure out a way to calm the traffic in another way." And so we engaged the community, we engaged the NAACP. We had again a great relationship with the NAACP, so that if Mr. Buxton received a complaint from somebody in the community that didn't feel comfortable coming to Fayetteville PD, he would call me and say, "Chief, this is what we have," and we would be on it. So it was a great collaboration of everybody that really brought about this change. Again, we continued to watch the data. Frank Baumgartner came in and shared the research that he had specifically to Fayetteville, and it really helped us start to frame the narrative of even the consent searches or the searches of cars. And as you said, we in 2016 our searches of cars and traffic stops dropped by 2/3. I was looking at the numbers the other day. It's still not where it needs to be, but at the end of the day, we dropped by 2/3 of consent searches. And then finally, it was the way our officers treated the citizens on the traffic stop. So we went through implicit bias training. We went through several blocks of instruction that helped our officers start to identify perhaps some hidden biases that they may have, and also talk through some of the things that they had seen, they had heard, and they had been taught. And as those traffic stops increased, again, the complaints went down. All of the fatalities and injury traffic accidents went down, and the citizen satisfaction went up. But it was the way the officers talk to folks. And so some people would say to me, well, Harold, you just started writing a lot of warning tickets, so everybody was happy. And the answer is no, we still did our fair share of what I call the uniform citation, but I've always called it the big ticket because it's bigger than the warning ticket. And we still did our fair share of those. But it was the officers educating the person about why they were involved in that traffic stop. When the officer felt like it was important that the person hold that larger ticket, they certainly were the recipient of that ticket. But it was amazing the number of people who started to say, Chief, thank you. Your officer was so nice. Thanks for their attitude and the way they handled the traffic stop with me the other night. So those are the things when you talk about citizen satisfaction that are hard to gauge, except the anecdotal experience of hearing people say, our officers are everywhere. The blue lights are on. They're on the major thoroughfares where people are speeding, where the violations are occurring and the serious accidents are happening. And thank you for being there. One last thing I want to share, and then I'll give it back to you, Kirsten.
No,
Kirsten, is
great.
this. We one of the early things that I asked my officers to do, when I say ask, I told them, but one of the things that I directed the officers to do was get out of the neighborhoods. Let's enforce traffic laws where the serious traffic crashes are occurring. And those were on the major thoroughfares, the 4 and 6 lane roads that run through the heart of our city, those intersections that are most dangerous. And let's begin to deal with those things, DWIs and the things that really keep people safe.
I seem to remember you're saying that there were a couple calls where people said your officers were so nice when they stopped them. And then there was a second part of that story.
Right.
Where you would say, oh, so did they just write you a warning?
Right. It's so funny because there were a few of those, but a couple of them that I remember that were so profound, and they actually occurred in community meetings where they were ladies, I'm sorry, but they were female drivers, but they came up and said, Chief, I met the nicest officer the other night. And, he was just so caring and so took the time to explain everything, why I was stopped, and I wanted to make sure that I was okay because I was a little bit jittery. But he was the nicest officer. And I would go, well, that's great. It sounds like he gave you a warning ticket. And both these ladies said, oh no, he gave me the big ticket.
Ticket.
So, it was working. It was exciting to kind of see the change. And then Kirsten, out of that again, this is in 14 and 15 and 16. But if you remember 14 and 15 into 16, there was a lot of unrest around the country. Ferguson was going on. Baltimore had occurred. The things in Dallas and Baton Rouge had occurred. My officers were coming to me and almost bewildered that they were going to restaurants or going through drive-thrus to get a meal while on duty, and someone had paid for their food. And that was new to them because they had never experienced that
reciprocity of the community changing their feelings towards them.
Right. So
wow.
It was really neat to see. A couple of guys said, hey, I feel like I'm a rock star because everybody likes us now.
Right.
And that was pretty amazing transformation.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to share some statistics with the audience too, and there's no way for me to do it other than read it. But when you talk about the decreases from 2012 to 2016 in complaints and in injuries and in crime, I mean, in 2012, the kinds of equipment and regulatory violations that were being cited, like expired tags, were upwards of 21,000 in 2012. And in 2016, they were under 7,000. Speeding and running stoplights or stop signs in 2012 were as low as just under 16,000. But in 2016, they were up to 54,000, which tells a story that it wasn't like you and your officers were not stopping people for speeding. I mean, it pretty much 3 times more, you know? So what is it about, are equipment violations easier to make traffic stops for rather than moving violations?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
I'll share, my frustration years ago, if everyone remembers, if you've been in North Carolina for any amount of time, we used to have the inspection sticker on the left front corner of our windshield, right?
right.
And that was an easy stop for me as a patrol officer. And I was taught, if you see an expired inspection sticker, that's a stop. You make that stop. And then you find out what else is going on in the car. That's how I was taught. And so when North Carolina did away with the inspection stickers on the car, I was angry because now you've taken away my opportunity to see, and many officers were. But at the same time, then you had the computers start to come into to policing. We were tied into DMV, so you again could very easily run a tag and see if you still can today, and it's a very good tool. Don't get me wrong, but in the proper context, you can run that tag and see if there's an inspection sticker or a registration violation, or the driver has no operator's license. And Kirsten, the numbers you just shared with many of those non-moving violations in 16 are as a result of traffic stops where those violations for enforcement, where those violations were found after the stop. So we had a person that ran a stoplight. We stopped them. They were also no operator's license. So there was a check mark there for no operator's license. So that's where a lot of those charges came from. I didn't want my officers, there's a couple of reasons. I didn't want my officers just making traffic stops based on the computer. There's no skill in that. It's simply typing in a number and now you make the stop. I wanted them to do something that had meaning. Again, some skill. And so I'll challenge you and our listeners tomorrow when you go to work, if you're not working from home, but tomorrow when you go to work, and you pull up to that stoplight that is notorious for people running it. Here's what I want you to do. And here's what you have to do to have a violation and a conviction of a stoplight violation. There's a white line that you pull up to at the intersection. That's not, by the way, the white line that says the race is getting ready to start. That's where you're supposed to stop for the intersection. So as you pull up there, watch, and the cross traffic, here's what I want you to do. Watch the white line, the glow from the traffic light, and then the car coming through. And when that car comes through, it needs to be fully across the white line under the red light. That's called a stoplight violation. And I challenge you to tell me who's driving the car.
Huh. Okay.
You can't tell if it's a male or a female, white, black, or anything. You're looking at that violation. You're cluing into it. That's the skill I wanted my officers to begin to hone. What did a moving a rolling stop at a stop sign? What did that look like? But more importantly, what does it look like at that major intersection where somebody's going to roll a stop sign and cause a T-bone crash and people are going to get hurt or killed? So we really started to stress that ability to look at a traffic violation for what it was, and that was those things that would keep people alive with skill.
That's great. You know, there's a story you've told me before about a notorious criminal in Fayetteville. If you all can't tell, Harold is a great storyteller, a lot of which illustrates points that are important to be made. But the notorious criminal in Fayetteville that you learned about when you got there, who'd been policed by traffic stops, I feel like that story really illustrates the shift that you were seeking to make. Would you share that story with our guests?
Yeah, and Kirsten, it's all about, using investigating crimes. Don't use traffic stops as a way to investigate a crime. Use traffic stops to enforce traffic laws. So to the story, we had this young man who's 26 years old who I had been told was suspected of 6 murders in that city since he was 16. The guy was a major drug dealer, according to my officers, and was very, very dangerous. He was running a pretty sophisticated organized crime group. And so my drug enforcement officers were, Kirsten, you froze. Can you hear me?
You froze for me too, so
Okay.
I'm moving my computer around.
So I don't know how much of that got picked up, but my
Nope.
officer, go ahead.
You're good.
Okay. My officers were this group of officers who were the street drug officers were stopping this fella every time he stopped or every time he drove his car. Well, it became clear as they were telling me who this guy was and me asking, well, what did you get out of the traffic stop? And my officers would say, well, we never got a gun. We didn't get drugs, but we know he's moving drugs across the city. Well, then you're stopping the wrong car. Okay. So let's think about this in a little bit different manner. In the meantime, this guy was really good at complaining on the officers, making those complaints, those harassment complaints for the traffic stops. And so we started to shift our strategy in dealing with him. And we brought in the FBI and their Safe Streets Task Force who worked with our officers. And we began a criminal investigation on this man rather than just the traffic enforcement. That it was clear with my officers that things were escalating. It had started long before I got there, and it had just continued to escalate in 2013. So I told the officers to stop stopping him. Stop stopping him. So they did. They were angry with me, but that's okay. But we shifted our focus. Well, the last traffic stop that my officers made on this guy, of course, yielded no drugs, no gun, and he and his mother came downtown, came to the police headquarters as they did with every traffic stop, and made a complaint. And then they insisted with my internal affairs folks that they were not going to leave until they talked to the new chief. So my internal affairs commander came down and said, Chief, he's not leaving until he talks to you. And he said, but you should do that. And I said, well, let's go hear what the man has to say. And so he shared his angst, his frustration, his anger, his hatred of Fayetteville PD. And I listened to everything. And at the conclusion of what he shared, I said this to him. And I said, you have 3 children. He told me he had 3 children. I said, you need to decide who's going to take care of your children because you can't continue in this lifestyle. We're not going to stop you anymore, but you're not going to end up alive long because someone else is going to kill you or you're going to end up in federal prison. And he said, no, Chief. He said, sooner or later, one of your people is going to stop me, and it's either them going to be dead or I'm going to be dead. That's a scary thing for a person to say to an officer. And I said, listen, I'm telling you that we're not going to stop you anymore, but you need to decide who's going to raise your children when you're gone. And he couldn't understand what I was saying. And I told him, I said, who's going to watch out for your mom? Who's going to watch out for your children? You're going to leave everybody, because you're going to be gone. No, Chief, I'm an upstanding businessman. I have a car wash and that's how I make my money. And I said, okay. He left and I assured him that we would investigate the complaint that he had over the last traffic stop that Fayetteville PD ever made on him, but that we weren't going to stop him anymore. And at 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had a federal agent and one of my officers off of that very task force come to my office and say, Chief, less than an hour after he left your office, we got him on video dealing major drugs, holding a gun at his car wash. And they continued that investigation, Kirsten, until one day they went to his house, arrested him as he came across the front lawn. And I will be gone from this earth before that young man is ever released from federal prison. Mm-hmm. That's the way we conduct or should conduct investigations. And it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be those times where we have to make that stop, where through an investigation, we know that drugs or guns are in a car, but to stop a car just to see what's under the front seat or what's in the ashtray, an ashtray, nobody has those anymore, but what's in a car is counterproductive. It doesn't yield what we always hope that it will. Most of those high yield traffic stops are as a result of an investigation.
That's awesome. What would you say about, if someone says, well, we do need to do equipment violation stops because, a brake light out could be the cause of an accident, and that's life and injury.
Yeah, and I am more interested in certainly if you've got one brake light out, you've got another one that's working. Okay, so if you feel the need to call that to somebody's attention, make the stop. There are plenty of instances across the country. We've seen them on YouTube and videos where officers have made a traffic stop for a brake light and gone in the trunk and actually fixed the light for the person. That's the kind of community service and guardianship that we need to be doing. If you feel the need to make that stop and write that warning ticket to help that person remember that they need to get that done, then so be it. But that's not what kills people for the most part. Let's pay attention to those things that are most important. I'm always nervous about somebody that says, well, that if we let the little things go, the big things are going to take, or the little things turn into big things. I am really always concerned that we're stopping someone for an equipment violation or a no operator's license violation who's just going to work. And so here we are making a traffic stop, writing this uniform citation, the big ticket, which comes with court cost and a fine, and the person still has to either go get their license renewed or the equipment violation corrected and then pay that money. And they may be the only breadwinner in the family. So one of the things I ask my officers to do is take all of that into consideration. Don't pile on. If you've got somebody working Monday through Friday, 12 hours a day, our friends at DMV are not open on Saturday. So you tell me when they're going to get to DMV to get this corrected. And if they're worried about putting food on the table for their kids, they're not going to fix that equipment. So if you see it, why don't you find a way to get a garage to help them work through that problem? Again, being the guardian, not being the enforcer. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question. Thank you so much, from one of our audience members who wanted to know, going back to pre-2012, while you were here in Charlotte at CMPD, did you or your colleagues implement any policies to decrease traffic stops here in Charlotte?
No. One of the things that I have to give full credit to, Kirsten, is my mentor and my friend, Rodney Monroe. He was my chief here in Charlotte. And one of the things that Chief Monroe did as he came to Charlotte in 2008 was to really help us to start to think about how we're interacting with the community. And as I promoted to deputy chief, he spent a lot of time with me explaining, our decision making as chiefs on the community. And one of the things I took to Fayetteville with me was, I'm not just the chief of the Fayetteville Police Department. I am the chief for the city of Fayetteville, which means everybody. It's a fine line. We did a lot of work with violent crime when Chief Monroe and I were working together here from 2008 to 2012. And so when you look at the shift in violent crime, that has to do with the fact that we were better interacting with our public. He began to institute some changes in the way traffic stops were conducted, but I don't think we ever got to the point of it maturing. And honestly, it's easier to turn a 400-person ship than it is to turn an 1,800-person ship. And again, I had the benefit of being able to meet with every one of my officers quarterly. With 1,800 people in 13 different divisions, that was really difficult to do. And honestly, a lot of his message was filtered by the mid-level folks that really struggled with the direction that we were trying to go here in Charlotte.
Thank you. That's so helpful. We have another question from our audience members. How can the average person advocate for changes to law enforcement policies within their own communities?
Well, so many, and here in Charlotte, in Fayetteville, in so many communities now, all of the policies and procedures are or should be on the department's website. those are not secret.
Right.
And so if you want to know, as an example, in Charlotte or in Fayetteville, what the policy or the practice is and how they conduct traffic stops, go to the website, pull up the directive that directs that. If there's a concern, I think the best way to start to deal with that is to, in a larger department, meet with your local division commander, build a relationship with them, and then start to work through those problems. It's hard to go to somebody, to the police department with a complaint, yelling, saying this needs to be fixed. It's all about relationships. And so, if you start to build that relationship with the police commander, the police chief, I don't care who it is, or the police officers, just simply to say, hey, tell me about how and why you make a traffic stop, and talk through that, and maybe have that conversation. And I'll use the disparity issue as an example. Officer, I'm really nervous, when I'm stopped. Well,
Me too.
here's a news flash. The officers are nervous when the North Carolina Highway Patrol stops them when they're off duty. So everybody's nervous on a traffic stop. Nobody wants to get that ticket. So it's all about relationships, starting to build that, and know one another. Change doesn't come when we're yelling at each other. Change comes because we're working together. We know one another. We may not always agree, but we're working toward a common goal.
That's so helpful. I think, you mentioned implicit bias earlier, and I think we can do a lot of training around that. But this difference between moving towards stops for moving violations as opposed to stops for equipment violations somewhat takes bias out of the picture, because you can't see the race of the speeder.
Right.
And that's part of the strategy. We do have another question from another audience member. We've been told we're doing a great program. I want you to know that.
Good.
And this is a serious topic. You're a friend. We enjoy talking to each other, but we know that people have lost their lives in traffic stops, and far too many Black and brown people are represented in those numbers. This gentleman asks, what effect do police unions have on disciplinary issues?
All right, Nate. Now you got me started. Okay,
Uh-oh.
So here's the great news for our listener. First, North Carolina does not have unions. South Carolina does not have unions, and I think that is the best thing that could happen to law enforcement as it relates to their community. There are plenty of opportunities for officers to be represented if they're accused of something. I'm saying this because of my work with departments that do have unions and do have strong unions. That's a real problem, that you cannot either identify the problem officer or the problem that's driving the officers. And then when you do identify that person, in my opinion, I think the organized labor really prohibits the department from doing the things that need to be done to separate the department from that person. That always throws people, because you say, well, normally you separate the person from the department, but I think we just need to separate the department from the person and move on. And officers are human beings. We're adults. We know if someone is disciplined or is terminated for an egregious offense, it might not be a good idea for us to do that again. And so the discipline the ability that I had to discipline officers both in Charlotte and in Fayetteville was very effective. The ability that I had to separate the department from officers in Fayetteville, much different than here in Charlotte. But the officers had the opportunity to appeal those decisions, whether it was discipline or termination. There was a process. They had the opportunity to be represented by legal counsel. But at the end of the day, the decision was made, and we were going to move forward. So I am so happy that I came up in a system in North Carolina that we're not a unionized state as it relates to law enforcement.
Thank you. We have one last question before we close, and I think it's such an appropriate question. How can I exercise my rights as a citizen during a traffic stop that will not escalate the situation with the officer?
So, in a traffic stop, it's tough to exercise your rights. There is an officer there. They've made hopefully a valid stop for a valid reason. I've always said that's not the time to debate the stop or the violation. That's why we have the court system, and that's why we have in our state. That's why the departments have internal affairs departments. If you feel that you've been wrong, smile, take the citation, and thank the officer, and de-escalate. Because if everybody is dropping their tone of voice, that's right, dropping their tone of voice versus escalating, then it's just going to turn out bad, and no one is going to win on a traffic stop. So whatever the violation is, be polite, be courteous, expect the officer to be the same way. If you want to record it, you certainly can, because he or she now is recording it as well. There is a record of it, and then you have that official record plus any record that you have to deal with that complaint. Kirsten, if I could, I just want to finish with one quick story.
Please, of course. It wouldn't be right if we couldn't finish with a story.
The last traffic stop that I made as a police officer in Fayetteville, and I drove an unmarked Dodge Charger. I love that car, by the way. It was a really cool car. But I was going home to lunch one day because I could do that. And so it was a nice fall day. It was again right toward the end of my time in Fayetteville. I was going home. Gloria had lunch ready for me, and so I pull up to a stoplight. I have the windows down because it's nice, and you can see the lights. I had blue lights in the front and the back and the side because they really did it upright for me there. But everybody could see that I was a police officer. But more importantly, the window that was down, and people could see that I was the chief. And so people were waving, and hey, chief, how are you? And so the light turns, and we start up this 4-lane road. And about 3 cars back from me is a beautiful white Mercedes, brand new. And that car, although it was a 4-lane highway, there was a turn lane in the middle of the lane for left or rights. And that car pulled out and passed all of us in that middle lane, speeding away. So the couple of folks that had seen me at the stoplight are looking over like, hey, stupid, what are you going to do? And my hands are tied. So I pulled out and turned the lights on and made the traffic stop because it was a violation, speeding and really reckless driving. And I walked up to the car. The window rolls down. It's a very elegant, middle-aged, I shouldn't say that, very elegant lady of refinement that was driving. And I said, ma'am, Officer Medlock, and I'm wearing the white shirt of the command staff, and of course all the jewelry that involves a chief. And I said, the reason I stopped you, and she said, I didn't do anything wrong. And I didn't even get the reason why I stopped her out. And so she said, you just stopped me because, and then the escalation begins between this lady and me. So now she's made me mad. And so I said, ma'am, if you'll just stop talking for a minute, and let me tell you why I stopped you. Well, you just stopped me because, and I'll let you pick the reasons, okay? And so she talked again, and I said, ma'am, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to go back to my car, and I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths, and I want you to do the same thing. And I'm going to come back up, and let's try to start this over again. And she looked at me kind of surprised, and I walked back to my car. And I called the stop in, and one of my uniformed officers pulls in behind me. I told him, stay in the car. I don't need you up here. And so I took the deep breaths. I walked back up to the car. I said, good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Officer Medlock. And she said, good afternoon, officer. How are you today? And so we started the conversation. I said, ma'am, let me just tell you why I stopped you. I said, forget the violations, but everybody was expecting me to stop you. And I said, I had to. And I said, I didn't want to. I said, I'm just trying to go to lunch. And so she started laughing, and we had a good conversation. At the end of it, I wrote her the warning citation. And so when I came back up and I handed her the citation, I explained it to her that it's a warning, nothing to be done. It's just a reminder. And she looked up at me, and she said, "Are you Chief Medlock?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." And she said, "I can't believe I started yelling at the police chief." And I said, "Ma'am, I can't believe you did either." I said, "But more importantly, I can't believe I let myself start to become upset." I said, "Because that's not what I teach my officers." Sometimes we just need to take a breath in these situations. It doesn't work all the time, and my officers have to be safe. They have to make sure that the person in the car is not a potential threat, that they're not showing vulnerability to the person. But it never hurts to say, "Hold up a minute. Let's just, you and I,
Let's
take a
take a
breath
breath.
and start over." And so I would encourage people that are on traffic stops to try that. And just say, "You know what, officer, give me a minute. I just need to calm down." And the minute that word calm comes out, the officer's going to calm down. If the voice drops, the officer's voice is going to drop. So everybody talking at the same level just increases or decreases the excitement, the danger, I think, in these traffic stops. So it's a great example of just trying to de-escalate. And it's okay. It's not only for the officers to de-escalate. It's everybody's responsibility to calm it down. And then finally, I'll tell you this. I had an officer who told me one time, "Chief, I'm not rude to black drivers or white drivers any more than the other. I'm just rude to everybody." And I said, "Well, that's a problem. And so we're either going to fix you or we're going to help you find other employment, not in law enforcement." And he learned. He learned to treat people a little bit better. And that, I think, is the biggest problem we have in policing today, Kirsten, is a lack of understanding and the way we treat one another.
I can't think of a better way to wrap up this conversation with you, Harold Medlock, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your own vulnerabilities with our audience today. I want to also let everyone know that tomorrow you'll be receiving an email that includes a post-event survey, as well as a racial profiling checklist that our national office, YWCA USA, has put together. Racial profiling is one of the ways that institutional and structural racism impacts many of our marginalized communities. And the checklist can help you as a community member identify patterns and practices that can be documented. And making recommendations to local decision makers and organizing to change public policy and educate people that you care about can come from this practice of using the racial profiling checklist. I want to thank you again, Harold, for spending this evening with us in our fireside chat. And everyone, thank you for attending. We look forward to having you with us soon. If you have not read yet White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, that is the book for our book club, which will be meeting a week from today at the same time at 6 p.m. on November 19th. We welcome you to join us that evening. Harold, thank you so much. Please give Gloria our best.
Sure will. Thanks so much.
Thank you.